My name is Cassidy. After 3 years of relentless work, missing countless family dinners and holidays, to grow a department from 10 to 40 people, I believed the regional chief operating officer position was mine. But at the company's 25th anniversary party in front of hundreds of employees, my father-in-law, also the COO, raised his champagne glass and announced he was giving that role to his niece, Sloane, who had been there 6 weeks. The room erupted in applause while I gripped my glass until my knuckles went white, forcing a fake smile. Have you ever had your achievement ripped away right before your eyes? Leave a comment if you felt that, hit like, and don't forget to subscribe so you can hear my full story, because this is only the beginning. That night's shock changed my life entirely. For the past 3 years, my life had been defined by numbers, endless meetings, and the office lights reflecting off my desk late into the night. 60 hours a week wasn't the exception, it was the standard. I missed my best friend's wedding to close a last-minute deal. Christmas, Thanksgiving, even my own birthday, I spent them either in the office or flying out to meet clients. I kept telling myself the sacrifices would pay off. Richard, my father-in-law, always said, "This company is family, Cassidy. If you give it your all, you'll be recognized." I believed him. Believed him enough to ignore the strange truth that his real family always got the prime opportunities, from job titles to lucrative projects. When Ethan and I first got married, he was supportive. He'd call me the tireless one and brag about me to his friends. But as time passed, his excitement faded. Lately, when I tried to share updates about my projects or possible promotion, he'd say, "Yeah, that's good," without looking up from his phone. Many nights, he claimed to be working late at the law office, but when he came home, a trace of unfamiliar perfume lingered on his collar. I didn't want to suspect anything, but his distance made me feel like a stranger in my own marriage. At work, I didn't do my job, I built something. When I took over operations, there were 10 employees and a tight budget. I spent months recruiting, training, and restructuring processes. We grew to 40 people and revenue tripled in 2 years. I knew every employee's name, who had a newborn, who was struggling financially, who needed extra encouragement to meet targets. I considered that my duty as a leader, even if my title never reflected it. At rare dinners with my in-laws, Richard would talk about the company's victories, always using "we" when describing success, but never mentioning me. Sloane would occasionally visit, telling stories about her MBA at a prestigious school, and Richard would listen with the pride of someone already picturing her in any role he chose. Once, I joked that I'd been around long enough to deserve a seat at the executive table. Richard only chuckled. "Cassidy, you're still young. Keep doing your job well and your time will come." I was 42. Not young, but certainly not old enough to be dismissed. Yet in his tone, I caught the truth, that there would never be a place for me as long as there was still an empty chair reserved for family. At home, the distance between Ethan and me kept growing. He used to greet me at the door with a glass of wine, asking, "How was your day?" Now, when I came home late, he'd glance up for a second before returning to his laptop. I'd try to talk about a big project or an upcoming client contract, and he'd reply, "Good, as long as you're happy." His voice no longer sounded warm. It sounded like he wanted the conversation over quickly. I began to realize that not only at work but in my marriage, I was being taken for granted. I still cooked on weekends, remembered anniversaries, asked him about his job, but he never asked back. Some nights, I ate leftovers alone at the kitchen counter, listening to the TV in the living room as if it were an ocean between us. I remember one autumn evening, leaves scattered across the driveway. I had just secured the biggest contract in the company's history. I opened the door ready to tell Ethan, but the house was dark. He'd texted, "Dinner with clients, home late. No congratulations. No questions." I stood in the living room holding the file, feeling my excitement drain away like cold water. So I kept going. Kept believing that if I worked hard enough, stayed loyal enough, Richard would see my worth. That Ethan would be proud and supportive again. And then that night at the Chicago hotel proved that belief was nothing but an illusion. Earlier that afternoon, I only planned to reheat my homemade soup in the break room. The 12th floor lounge was right next to Richard's office. Thin walls that carried every sound if someone spoke loudly enough. The click of familiar heels echoed before I could press the microwave button. A young, slightly tense voice spoke. "I'm really not sure I can handle this." I knew instantly it was Sloane. Richard's voice followed. Slow, certain. Cassidy's done well at keeping things steady, but she's too safe. We need someone younger, bolder. I froze, hand still on the button. Richard lowered his voice, but the words still cut through the thin wall. She's 42. There's nothing fresh left there. I heard Sloane's soft laugh, then her hesitation. But I've never managed a department that size. Or those big clients. Richard reassured her without pause. Cassidy will train you. She's got nowhere else to go. The words landed like a cold blade to my chest. Nowhere else to go. In my mind, every contract I'd closed, every sleepless night over strategy plans, every connecting flight to meet a client, suddenly became proof that I was merely a placeholder until they could put one of their own in place. Through the wall, Sloane still sounded uncertain. I'm afraid I'll ruin relationships with the big clients. They know Cassidy. Richard chuckled, deep and confident. That's exactly the problem. They're too comfortable with her. We need change, to get them used to a different style. You'll bring new energy, fresh ideas. To Richard, the trust and stability I had built weren't assets. They were obstacles. Sloane's voice softened, almost guilty. But she's so dedicated. I don't want her to be upset. Richard's reply was firm. Cassidy's family. She'll understand. I heard the clink of a glass on the desk, likely ending the conversation. But those words stayed with me, heavy as stone. Family will understand. But in his eyes, who counted as family? Blood ties, or the daughter-in-law who had kept his company running smoothly for years. I returned to my soup, my hand trembling slightly. The warm chicken aroma suddenly seemed bland. I carried it out of the break room with no intention of eating. In the hallway mirror, I saw myself, navy suit perfectly pressed, hair neatly pinned, but my eyes had lost their familiar light. I walked straight back to my office and shut the door. On my desk sat 3 framed Employee of the Year awards from the past 3 years. Once they had made me proud. Now they looked like medals given to a gatekeeper, loyal, steadfast, and easily replaced when the time came. The sounds from Richard's office still drifted faintly down the hallway, fading into indistinct murmurs. In my head, one thought repeated over and over: they had planned this long ago. And I was the last link they needed to keep in place until they could replace me with one of their own. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. My heart didn't erupt in anger the way I thought it would. It went cold, like a lake sealed under ice. The kind of cold no apology could thaw. If that morning I'd still been telling myself I needed to push a little harder, by that afternoon everything had changed. I knew in Richard's eyes I was never a long-term choice. And once you know you're only a temporary piece, no one foolishly stands still, waiting for someone else's next move. That night I came home later than usual. The highway was still packed, headlights sweeping across my rearview mirror in bursts, gisty like my thoughts, flickering, tangled, unable to find a way out. All day Richard's words had been replaying in my mind, broken up by Sloane's hesitant voice and his reassurances. When I opened the door, the smell of tomato sauce still lingered in the air. The kitchen light was on, but the dining table was empty. Ethan was in the living room, laptop on his lap, eyes locked on the screen. He glanced up briefly when he saw me. Home? No. How was your day? No real glance of interest. I hung up my coat, stepped into the kitchen, then turned back. I want to talk to you for a minute, if that's okay. Ethan frowned slightly, closed his laptop and set it aside. About what? I sat down across from him, fingers interlaced to steady myself. Today your dad officially announced Sloane as regional COO. Ethan raised an eyebrow, then gave a slight nod as if he'd known already. Yeah, he mentioned it. I've waited for this opportunity for 3 years, Ethan. 3 years of grinding, sacrificing almost everything, and they gave it to someone who's been here 6 weeks. My voice shook, not from anger but from the sting of betrayal still fresh. Ethan was quiet for a moment, then spoke like he was choosing each word. Dad's only doing what's best for the company. Sloane's younger, she can bring new ideas. You should accept it. So what are you saying? That I'm too outdated for the job? That everything I've done over the past 3 years means nothing compared to a shiny new MBA and a blood connection? Ethan avoided my eyes, his fingers tapping lightly on the armrest. Don't make this personal. I let out a short, sharp laugh. Personal? This is my career. My life. I was pushed aside in front of the entire company, and my own husband tells me not to take it to heart? He let out a sigh and rose from his seat, the signal that the conversation was over. I don't want to fight, Cass. Dad's made his decision, and the more you push back, the worse it's going to get. So you're siding with him? Ethan offered no reply, his footsteps already carrying him toward the stairs. I listened to his footsteps fade, leaving behind a thick, heavy silence. I thought about finding something to eat, and when I opened the fridge, the light spilled over a familiar box. The apple tart I'd bought last week, his favorite. Still untouched, the lid still bearing the note I'd written in marker. For our Friday night. I held the box for a few seconds. The sugar glaze still shimmered, but it had begun to dry. Just like the way he used to care for me. Once sweet, now only for show, with no one actually enjoying it. I put the box back and shut the fridge. The soft click echoed in the quiet kitchen, but to me it felt like a period at the end of something. Outside, the December wind rattled the trees, dry leaves scraping the sidewalk like endless whispers. In my mind, I started threading things together. The dinners he came home late. The way Richard dodged my questions about the timing of the appointment. The looks I got at work today, some tinged with pity, others with careful avoidance. And now in my own home I couldn't find a place to lean on. The feeling of being shut out wasn't at the office. It had seeped into my marriage. I realized I'd been alone for a long time. Tonight was the first time I couldn't pretend otherwise. The next night I sat at my home desk with a brand new leather notebook. On the first page I wrote the title clearly, Intangible Assets. Things I knew Richard and Sloan couldn't buy, relationships, processes, and expertise I had built over years. For the next 2 weeks, by day I played the devoted mentor to Sloan. I walked her through everything, from adjusting contracts when shipping costs spiked unexpectedly, to handling calls at midnight when a container got held at the port. I answered every question, but I also watched quietly. Sloan took plenty of notes but never truly grasped the context. At night, after everyone left the office, I began my own work. Backing up every critical document, from client lists and transaction histories to the little details that kept relationships strong, like a purchasing director's birthday or a long-term partner's favorite dish. I saved them for myself, proof of the value I had created. One morning, as I explained Morrison Freight, our biggest client, to Sloan, she frowned. But why do we need to remember the name of Mr. Morrison's dog? I smiled, voice even. Because when he lost that dog, it was the worst week to call about contracts. Small things like that keep partnerships stronger than any formal agreement. Besides training her, I began checking in with key clients through casual maintenance calls. I never said I was leaving, just asked about their current needs, mentioned the company was making some interesting adjustments in leadership. The veterans understood. I heard a brief pause on the line before they'd answer, half joking, half serious. Hope those changes won't mean losing the best account lead we've ever had. In meetings, Richard grew more at ease, convinced I'd accepted my new role. He even patted my shoulder after a presentation, praising my team spirit. I returned the polite smile, but in my mind my steps were already mapped out. One late afternoon I remained alone in my office, the quiet pressing in from every wall, the sunset casting gold over the piles of files on my desk. I opened an email draft to myself and started a list. All strategic clients. The strongest, most loyal members of the team. Internal operating processes not documented in official manuals. As the list grew longer, I realized I held the department's lifeblood in my hands. And a thought struck me. If I left, it wouldn't be an empty title. It would be a void in knowledge and connections no one could fill right away. On the final Friday of that second week, I stopped by Sloan's office to hand off the last set of documents for a contract. She was still in her light-colored dress, eyes glued to her phone. This is Logan Group's payment schedule. Even one day late and they'll slap a penalty. Sloan nodded absently, fingers still typing. I'll remember. I knew she wouldn't. And that had ceased to be my concern. When I stepped out of the building that night, a light rain had started in Chicago. I paused under the awning, taking a deep breath. It felt like the quiet armor I'd been building was now solid. The feeling of passively waiting for someone else's decision had left me. 2 weeks of training, note-taking, and carefully planted remarks had passed. Outwardly, I was still Cassidy, the dedicated right hand to the new leader. Inside, I was ready to walk out that door. That morning, I had barely stepped into my office, bag still in hand, when the desk phone rang. Marie, Richard's longtime secretary, spoke softly but urgently. "Cassidy, he wants to see you right now." I was a little surprised. Richard usually only called me in for major reports or updates on strategic clients. I checked my calendar. No meeting scheduled. Richard's office was on the top floor, glass walls opening onto Chicago's skyline. When I walked in, he was standing by his desk, phone in hand, not speaking, motioning for me to sit. His face was heavy, his eyes more tired than usual. He set the phone down, took a deep breath. "We lost the Landon Freight account." I froze slightly. Landon Freight was one of the biggest contracts I'd ever signed. For 3 years, they'd been more than a client. They'd been friends of the company thanks to the trust one had built. "What happened?" I asked, though I already had a guess. Richard clicked his tongue, lowering his voice. "Sloan mishandled a shipping issue. They complained several times, but she didn't respond quickly enough. In the end, they canceled the contract." The image of Sloan absent-mindedly taking notes during my training on contract management came back to me. I had made it clear about Landon Freight that they required progress reports every 48 hours. But apparently that had never made it onto her priority list. Richard planted both hands on the desk, looking me straight in the eye. "I need you to stay. At least another 6 months. Help stabilize things, keep the remaining clients." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my voice steady. "6 months won't change anything, Richard." "Yes, it will." He leaned forward as if trying to persuade me. "You have relationships with those clients. They trust you. If you leave now, more contracts will fall apart." I shook my head slowly. "I've already planned my path forward. And you are not in it." In that moment, the room went so silent I could hear the ticking of the clock. Richard's expression flickered with shock before shifting into a mix of anger and disbelief. "Cassidy, this isn't business. This is family." "Family?" "A family where my work is labeled temporary, so it can be handed over to blood relatives? A family where a mistake by the new one gets excused, but I'm shoved aside without a word of warning?" His jaw tightened and he turned toward the window as if to end the conversation. I rose to my feet, steady and unwavering. "I'll finish my work for the rest of my time here. But I won't stay a single day beyond that." That evening when I came home, Ethan was sitting in the living room. He looked at me, his eyes no longer warm. "Dad said you refused to help the company during a tough time." I set my bag on the chair, forcing myself to stay calm. "I didn't refuse to help. I refused to give another 6 months of my life to a place that doesn't respect me." "You're betraying the family, Cass." "Betraying?" "Ethan, I worked myself to the bone for 3 years for this family. And what did I get? A chair handed to someone new and a request to train them to replace me. If there's betrayal here, it's not from me." His eyes dimmed, but I didn't care to read what was in them anymore. Between me and them was now a gap nothing could fill. That night, I went to the kitchen for a drink. When I came back, Ethan was still there, as if he wanted to say something but stayed silent. I walked past him without looking back. In my mind, the decision was sealed. Tomorrow I would write my resignation letter. Not to prove anything to Richard or to answer Ethan's accusations, but to free myself. I wrote it on a Monday morning before the office had fully filled. Just a few brief, emotionless, and politely worded lines. "Thank you for the opportunity. I valued the experience. I will fulfill my responsibilities until the final day." He read it, frowned, and looked up. "You're sure, Cassidy? Once you go, there's no coming back." "I know." My last day at Aldridge Logistics passed quietly. A few colleagues hugged me tightly. Others simply nodded, eyes averted as if afraid of being caught in the middle. I packed up my desk, fitting a few personal items into a cardboard box. A framed photo, a handful of pens, and a ceramic mug with a saying I used to love. "Do the right thing even when no one is watching." Only a week after leaving, I got a call I initially thought was a wrong number. "Hello, is this Cassidy Moore? This is Madison Clark, CEO of North Point Logistics." Her voice was low, clear, and carried the confidence of someone used to leading at the highest level. I was momentarily thrown. "Yes, this is me. Maddie. Clark. James Porter has spoken very highly of you. He said if I want to improve North Point's operations, there's no one better than you." I leaned back in my chair, picturing James's face. A former major client, someone I'd helped more than once when shipments were stuck at the border in the middle of a winter night. "That's a surprise. James is a great partner. And he thinks you're the only one he'd trust with contracts worth hundreds of millions." I'd like to meet to discuss a position I believe you'll be interested in. 3 days later, I was sitting in a glass conference room on the 20th floor of North Point's headquarters, looking out at the Chicago River glittering in the morning sun. Madison walked in wearing a sharp gray suit, shaking my hand firmly enough to convey trust. Cassidy, I'll be direct. North Point is expanding aggressively into the South and East Coast markets. I need a regional vice president of operations, someone with decision-making authority, leading the team and managing top-tier clients directly. She continued, the position comes with a salary 40% higher than what you currently make, plus a seat on the strategic council. And I'd like you to start as soon as possible. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to understand more about the people and the culture here. Madison, I have to ask, why me? You could choose anyone in this industry. She smiled. I choose the person clients trust. Experience can be learned, skills can be trained, but trust can't be bought. James said when he called you in the middle of the night, you answered and solved the problem right away. That's exactly the kind of leadership I need. Her words touched a part of me that had been neglected for too long at Aldrich, where my contributions were treated as a given. We spoke for nearly 2 hours. About the company's growth strategy, about crisis management. I could see Madison's eyes light up when I broke down how to retain clients through details most people overlook. Before I left the room, Madison stood. I'll let you think it over, but I'd like to hear your answer soon. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, the warm light pooling over the printed contract on the table. The salary, authority, and growth opportunities were clear. But more than that, it was the feeling. Here, from the first meeting, my value was seen. The next morning, I called Madison. I accept. Her voice came back, decisive and satisfied. Welcome to North Point, Cassidy. We have a lot of work to do. On my first day at North Point, I walked into the building with a completely different feeling. Everything was bright, open, and full of energy. Instead of cautious or measuring looks, I was met with firm handshakes and genuine smiles. And for the first time, I didn't have to tell myself, work harder to be recognized. Stepping into North Point, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Not to prove myself to Richard or anyone at Aldrich, but to confirm to myself that all those years of dedication had never been meaningless. The first opportunity came in just 2 weeks. The contract with Mason Reed, one of North Point's largest clients, was on the brink of collapse. They complained about shipping delays, inaccurate tracking, and had already scheduled a meeting with leadership to discuss the possibility of ending the partnership. Madison handed the case to me, her eyes full of trust. Cassidy, if anyone can save this contract, it's you. I spent 3 full days combing through every bit of data, calling each person responsible for every leg of the shipments, and most importantly, calling Mr. Reed late at night. I know you're busy, but I want to hear directly from you. What would make Mason Reed stay? He sighed. We need to feel like we're a priority, not just a tracking number in the system. You'll have that starting now. 2 weeks later, Mason Reed not only stayed but signed an expanded service package. In the review meeting, Madison looked at me and smiled. I knew you'd get it done. From that success, I began implementing a new client management model, combining automated data with personalized relationships. Instead of relying solely on software to track orders, we built human profiles for each partner. Collaboration history, preferences, habits, and details no system could store. 3 months later, revenue from strategic clients was up 25%. The board called it the Cassidy effect. I simply saw it as finally working in a place where good ideas were acted on, instead of dismissed because they came from the wrong person. Word spread quickly. One morning, while checking emails, I saw a message from John Peterson, the purchasing director of a Dallas logistics company I had managed at Aldrich. Cassidy, I hear you're at North Point. If that's true, I'd like to talk about moving our entire contract over to you. I hadn't spoken to John since leaving Aldrich, but he had found me. When we spoke by phone, he explained, I had no issues with Aldrich until you left. Since then, the response times are slow, mistakes pile up, and I'm tired of repeating things you always remembered. John wasn't the only one. Within 2 months, 3 more former clients reached out, asking if North Point could handle their needs. I never solicited them, but they came because they trusted me, and because the promises they'd been given at Aldrich were no longer kept. At an industry conference in Houston, I happened to walk past Aldrich's booth. Sloan was there, forcing a smile at visitors, but I could see the worry in her eyes when she noticed familiar faces passing by without stopping. After the opening session, I ran into Sarah Collins, an operations head at a rail freight company I'd once worked with. We shook hands and she said bluntly, "Cassidy, I don't know the story of how you left Aldridge, but they're losing clients left and right. And the only reason I ever hear is, Cassidy's not here anymore." Her words kept me quiet for a long moment. I didn't feel the satisfaction some might expect. Instead, it was something more complex, a mix of pride and sadness. I had spent a large part of my life building those relationships and seeing them wasted in someone else's hands. I only felt sorry for the people who were still there. At North Point, success kept building on success. I was invited to join the strategy group for international market expansion. Every morning, walking into a sunlit office, I was greeted with questions about new ideas, not the scrutinizing looks I used to know. And most importantly, I had learned to let go of meaningless expectations in places that never intended to value me so I could focus on places that truly saw my worth. One Thursday evening, I had finished an online meeting with the market development team when my phone rang. The number was familiar, but I hadn't seen it in a long time. "Cassidy?" Margaret Hill's soft voice came through, but I recognized it instantly. Margaret had been the head accountant at Aldridge, one of the few who had always shown me genuine respect and empathy. "Margaret, it's been so long. How are you?" There was a pause on the other end, then she sighed. "Not so well. They're preparing for mass layoffs, starting with the most loyal people." I gripped the phone. Even though I had left Aldridge, I still remembered the faces of those who had been there for years. The ones who quietly carried the hardest burdens without ever making it onto a performance report. "Are you on that list?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yes." Her voice wavered. "I've been there nearly 20 years, Cassidy. And now, in one afternoon, they just called me in, handed me an envelope and said thank you." I asked directly, "Would you want to work somewhere your experience and dedication are truly valued?" "You mean?" "North Point is expanding. We need someone who understands complex financial processes, and you're the most qualified person I know." On the other end, I heard a breath of relief mixed with emotion. "Cassidy, I don't even know how to thank you." "Don't thank me. You're simply moving from a place that doesn't deserve you to one that will." Less than a month later, Margaret walked into North Point's office with her new employee badge. I stood in the lobby to welcome her, seeing her shoulders a little less burdened. She shook Madison's hand, and I knew this would be a fresh start for her. The surprising thing was that Margaret's arrival opened the door for many others. Word spread quickly within Aldridge, not about me poaching staff, but about how North Point was willing to hire capable, ethical professionals regardless of age or personal connections. Within 6 months, at least 5 major contracts that had once belonged to Aldridge moved to North Point. They were all clients I had managed, and they came not to hurt Aldridge, but because they wanted the professionalism and respect they had once known. During that same time, 12 veteran Aldridge employees, from operations and customer service to warehouse management, also applied and were hired at North Point. I still remember one morning walking into the conference room to find 4 familiar faces lined up for interviews. One of them, Tom, a coordination specialist, looked at me and said, "Cassidy, if you were still at Aldridge, I'd never have left. But now, that place isn't what we used to know." I understood that feeling better than anyone. North Point didn't benefit from this experienced workforce. The company culture changed as well. Those who had endured environments dominated by office politics knew the value of transparency and collaboration. They brought hard-earned lessons that helped us avoid repeating Aldridge's mistakes. One late afternoon, I stepped onto the balcony of the 18th floor, watching the sunset spill across the city. In the distance stood Aldridge's headquarters, its lights glittering but stirring nothing in me except memories. Madison stepped out beside me holding 2 cups of coffee. "You've made a difference, Cassidy. Not for North Point, but for these people." I took the coffee, answering softly, "They're the ones making the difference." I just opened the door. Madison smiled, then stepped back inside. Below, the car lights stretched into long trails, and my new life kept finding its rhythm. The invitation sat on my desk at North Point one early winter morning, thick paper, embossed with the familiar Aldridge Logistics logo in the corner. "We cordially invite Mrs. Cassidy Moore to attend the annual gala and awards ceremony." I read it twice, then a third time. Nothing in the card explained the reason, but I understood. Richard never did anything without a purpose. Over the past 6 months, North Point had consistently signed contracts Aldridge had lost. I guessed he now wanted some sort of public gesture to salvage the company's image. That evening, I told Madison about it while we were reviewing the quarterly report. "You're planning to go?" she asked, her eyes both curious and cautious. "I am. But not to apologize or to reclaim anything. I want him to see who I've become." The gala was held in the Grand Ballroom, the hotel I had been to countless times while at Aldridge. This time, I chose a deep green velvet dress with a bateau neckline and long sleeves, simple but sharp. My hair in a low bun, my mother's pearl earrings the only accent. Walking through the lobby, I caught a few familiar faces. Some smiled in greeting, others avoided my eyes. The air felt awkward, as if my presence reminded them of things they'd rather forget. When the background music softened, the MC took the stage. Richard's opening speech began as it always had, talking about challenges, accomplishments, and the family spirit of the company. That I took my seat at a table with a group of major North Point clients, listening to every word with the calm detachment of an outsider. Then he moved to the awards. Categories were called one by one: outstanding sales, customer service, innovation and operations. I was taking a sip of water when I heard the MC announce, "And this year's special award, the Lifetime Achievement, goes to Mrs. Cassidy Moore." Applause broke out. I hesitated for a moment, then walked onto the stage. Richard stepped forward with the gleaming glass trophy, his expression carefully pleasant. "Cassidy, your contributions over the years have left a lasting mark. Even though you're not with Aldridge anymore, we want to recognize that." I took the trophy, its cool weight in my hand. Holding the microphone, I looked out over the audience. Former colleagues, people I had worked alongside for years, clients, and Sloane sitting near the stage with her face tight. "Thank you. Working at Aldridge taught me many lessons. About business, about people, and about myself. One of them is, loyalty has value when paired with respect." I continued. "Without that, leaving isn't a loss, it's a beginning. And sometimes to find where you truly belong, you have to walk away from where you've been, no matter how hard it is." I paused, glancing at Richard. His eyes no longer held the confidence they had at the start. "I appreciate the time that's passed, but I'm also proud of the path I'm on now, where ideas aren't dismissed because they come from the wrong person, and achievements aren't overlooked because they come from the wrong bloodline. I hope everyone here, if faced with that choice one day, will choose the place that sees their true worth." I set the microphone down and bowed to the room. Applause began at Margaret's table, now my colleague at North Point, and spread outward. Not everyone clapped, but enough for me to know the message had reached someone. Stepping off the stage, I saw Madison standing at the doorway, smiling and giving me a small nod. As we walked out together, I glanced back once. Richard was still seated, his hand resting on the now empty trophy base, his eyes distant. Outside the hall, the cold Chicago night air swept in, crisp and clean. I gave Madison's hand a light squeeze. "You okay?" she asked. "Better than okay." We stepped out onto the street, our heels clicking softly on the sidewalk. No need for revenge, no need to go back to prove anything. The success and freedom I now lived were the clearest answers I could give. What do you think of my story? If you were in that situation, would you stay to protect what you built or walk away to find a place that truly values you? I believe that in work or in family, loyalty only truly matters when paired with respect and recognition. Sometimes, having the courage to leave an environment that no longer fits is the best way to open new doors. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the encouragement someone needs while facing a difficult choice. And if you want to hear more thoughtful, relatable stories about life, family, and unexpected turning points, don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss a thing. I promise, there are many more stories waiting to be told.